Hi, my name is Cheryl, and I am going to show you some easy ways that you can make your Plotly plots better. So if any of you have used Plotly before, you'll know that the default charts are not the most visually appealing. But this presentation is going to walk you through 9 ways that you can bring your Plotly charts to life. Quickly about me, I worked as a data scientist for a little over 10 years. Half of that time I worked for the New York Police Department. And I did all of my analytics and visualizations in Python. I'm currently working as a data visualization analyst and learning JavaScript and D3. And I can tell you that building plots in Plotly is much easier. So for the purposes of this presentation, I kind of put myself back in the shoes of a data analyst at the New York Police Department. So I imagine that your chief is concerned about shootings in Manhattan and Brooklyn, the 2 boroughs most frequented by tourists. So a very simple analysis that you could do is just to look at how many shooting incidents are occurring each month in each borough to see if the number of shootings have increased at all over the past few years. So the simplest plot that you can make is this single line of code. It's just specifying the data frame that you're using with the data and which columns will appear on the X and Y axis, and then which column will differentiate each borough from the others. So this is the most default Plotly plot that you can make. The colors aren't fantastic. It obviously needs some formatting. So what this presentation is going to do is it's going to show you how you can take this plot and turn it into the plot on the right. In order to make that transformation, it's going to require more code. So we're also going to go from that single line of code on the left to all of that code on the right. And the code on the right can look very intimidating and overwhelming, but I am going to walk you through step by step how you can put that code together. So the first thing that you can do to improve the default plots is to create a sort of template. I like to do this in a separate file because that way, no matter where I'm building Plotly code, I can just import this file and then all of my plots will look consistent. But you can put this code within the actual notebook that you're working in as well. So in this template, I like to specify the background color, the grid line color, the font color and family, and then a color list. And this color list is a list of colors that will determine what the different series look like in your chart. So in this case, it's going to be all of the different colors of the lines in our line plot. So you just input all of this into a Go layout template method. And I named my layout plot_template. So if you have this in a separate file, the way that you would import it into the notebook that you're working in is by simply importing the file name at the top. And then in your Plotly code, you can just do template equals the file name dot template name. And if you're using Plotly Go, it's a similar code. It's just in the update layout method. So once you do that, now all of your template information is applied to all of your Plotly plots. And it looks like this, which is a huge improvement just with that one step. But the next thing that you might notice is the axes labels don't look very professional. They're not capitalized. They're not real words. The legend title is similar. So you can very easily map these default column names to more professional looking versions. And you can do that using the labels dictionary in your Plotly code. And it's simply a dictionary mapping, like I said, the column name to whatever you want the label for that column name to look like. So now that we did those labels, the axes labels and the legend title look a lot more professional. And these mappings are also reflected in the tooltips. But every plot really needs a title. So the next thing we're going to do is add a title, but we're going to go a little step beyond and include a title with colored text in it. So in the update layout method, you just include all the information regarding your title. And in this case, I want to color the words for Manhattan and Brooklyn to be the same color as the corresponding line in the line plot. So if you ever want to format the text in a title in Plotly, you need to use HTML span tags. So in this case, I've included a span tag and changed the color for the words Manhattan and Brooklyn. And if I execute that code, You'll see that now you have a title at the top and the Manhattan and Brooklyn words match the corresponding colors of their lines. And it's not uncommon in a plot to see both a title and a subtitle. So we're going to add a subtitle as well. And all we have to do is just kind of append more code to the existing title text. So what you have to do is add a break tag at the end of the title line, so that creates a new line. And then you'll see that there's span tags for every section of my subtitle. And that's because I want the subtitle to be a smaller font. So I need to change the formatting of all of the text. And that's why I need to use HTML on every line. And then similar to the title, I'm going to color the words for Bronx, Queens, and Staten Island so they match their corresponding lines as well. So now we have a great looking title, a great looking subtitle. And the next thing you might notice is that all 5 boroughs are now colored in the correct way in this title and subtitle. So you don't really need a legend at this point. It's a little redundant and it's just kind of taking up space. So if you want to get rid of the legend, all you have to do is add this show legend equals false. And now you don't have a legend and there's more space for the plot itself. And this isn't a lot of data, but if you had a lot of data, it would allow the data to be spread out a little bit more. Okay, so at this point, you've done all of the basics. The plot looks good, but let's say you wanted to add things to the plot in order to provide additional context to the data so the reader has a better sense of what's going on. So the first thing that I wanted to note was when the lockdown started in New York City. And I know that was on March 18th, 2020. So I can kind of pinpoint that date using a vertical line. So in order to do that, I just have to use the add_v line method, and I'm specifying where on the x-axis I want to put that line. And then ran the different attributes having to do with the line and different attributes having to do with the annotation. So once I add that code, you can see now I have a dashed vertical line at March 18th, and I have a label so that the reader knows what this line is showing them. So by including this line, the reader can now more easily see, okay, all of these big spikes kind of occurred soon after the lockdown started. If you want to draw attention to an entire area of the plot, instead of just a single data point like this date line, you can shade an entire section of the plot using rectangles. So as an example, and this is not based in reality whatsoever, let's imagine that the NYPD has a goal of 9 shooting incidents or fewer per month per borough. In that case, you might want to shade the region between 0 and 9 shooting incidents, because that'll make it easier for the reader to be able to see when these lines fall within that range and when they fall outside of that range. So in order to add that rectangle, I'm going to do add_hrect, because it's a horizontal rectangle, meaning it's going to span the entire length of the x-axis. So all I have to do is specify the start and end on the y-axis so it knows how tall to be. And I'm going to make that 0 to 9. And then I don't really need a line around it, so I set the line width to 0. But the most important thing to remember is to set the opacity to be pretty low, because if it's not low, then you won't be able to see the data series on top of it. But if you set the opacity to be low, then you can still see the lines. And then I just created a small annotation on the right side. So with that code, now you can see that the whole area of the plot between 0 and 9 is now shaded, and it has a little goal annotation on the right. So now the reader can easily tell that pretty much lately only Staten Island is falling within the goal range of 0 to 9 shooting incidents. The last way that you can add context to the data, or a third way that you can add context, is to include an annotation in your plot. So I like to include annotations for anomalies or things that stand out that the reader might ask a question about. I like to kind of answer their question before they've even asked it. So in this case, if you're looking at this data, something that probably stands out is this July 2020 point for Brooklyn. I don't actually know what caused that, but let's pretend that I did. And I wanted to add an annotation. So I'm going to use add_annotation, specify the text. This was caused by event X. You can show an arrow to your annotation, or you can just show text with no arrow, but I chose to include an arrow. And then most of the other parameters in this case are just specifying where in the plot the text is going to appear and where in the plot the arrow is going to appear. And then the last line is just specifying the size of the font. So now with that annotation, I have shown that event X is potentially a cause for that big spike in July 2020 in Brooklyn. And so the reader has some sort of context for why that data point is so much higher than the rest of them. So now, you've formatted the plot nicely. You've added context around what was going on at the time of these data points. But right now, all of the lines look similar to each other. There really isn't one line that's kind of standing out and grabbing your attention. But the chief is primarily interested in Manhattan and Brooklyn. So if you want to draw the reader's attention to the data that's most important, you can include some sort of conditional logic that basically says, if this line is for Manhattan or Brooklyn, make the line thicker so that it stands out more. Otherwise, make the line smaller. But in order to write that condition logic, you need to know what parameter can I reference that will have the information on what borough each line is representing. And one way that you can figure out what that parameter is to look at your figure's data tuple. Every Plotly plot has a data tuple. And you can see it by just writing the name of your plot, whatever you've named it, .data, and then printing that out. And then you'll see all of the metadata and values for your plot. So in this case, this is the metadata for the plot that I was making, and I just copied like the first 10 lines or so. But I immediately saw this parameter called name, and it housed the borough information that I want to use for my condition logic. So I knew I can just use this name parameter to make the lines for Manhattan and Brooklyn thicker. And I can write that actual condition logic in two different ways. The top way is the more typical Pythonic way. It's basically just saying for each trace in the figure, if the name is Manhattan or Brooklyn, change the line width to 4, otherwise keep it at 1.75. The second version is exactly the same logic, but it's using a Plotly method called for each trace. So this is specifically for Plotly, but it does the exact same thing as the code above. So if you include one of these two condition logics, then you'll see that now the line for Manhattan and the line for Brooklyn are much thicker than the rest of them. So the reader is immediately drawn to those two data series, which happen to be what's most important to the chief. So now looking at this plot, it's formatted nicely. The colors are better. You have a lot of context for what's going on. You're explaining any anomalies, and you're emphasizing the data that is really important. And it just took those 9 steps to take the plot on the left, the default Plotly plot, and turn it into this plot in the bottom right. So hopefully these tips were helpful, and you can find examples of when you can implement some or all of these tips. And if you ever have any questions about Plotly, feel free to reach out either via my email or through my website, and I'd be happy to help you with your Plotly work. Thank you again.